we're back on a hotspot. So yeah, so just to introduce Fresh Minds and then on to the webinar series. So we've been hosting webinars throughout the sort of COVID crisis, and having kind of spent most of the first 5 or 6 webinars chatting about the crisis management and how you kind of deal at a project management level and at a sort of psychological level with uncertainty. We now move to hopefully a more positive way of looking at and reimagining what the future might look like. So we're therefore delighted to have Deri Hughes here, who is an ex-manager from Bain and also the former chief finance and operating officer from Credo Consulting, and now runs Honeycomb, which we'll talk about in a bit more detail, which essentially is a consultancy to help smaller consultancies grow profitably across all the various elements and operations that a consulting firm has. And he is going to talk to the topic of the flat firm, a more inclusive, engaged and profitable consulting business. And in a way, it's always quite interesting, because I remember about 18 years ago, I read an article in The Economist talking about Dr. Heal Thyself, which was essentially saying that consulting firms have been terribly bad at actually advising themselves on how to kind of grow and adapt to the changing world. And Deri has some very interesting insights as to what consulting firms of the future might kind of look like. So a very warm virtual welcome to Deri. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. Wonderful to be here speaking to you all. Really appreciate you taking the time. I know there are many webinars out there at the moment, and it's a real honor that you've kind of chosen to join this one. I'm just going to introduce myself for those that don't know me. So my name's Deri Hughes. As James said, I'm the founder of Honeycomb PS. Our kind of reason for existing is to help leaders of consulting firms, typically smaller firms, build their capabilities. So we do that through operations planning at a strategic level, but also through our training programs, one-to-one coaching, and our core outsourced operations services. So we'll provide finance services, HR services for small consulting firms. I'm also co-founder of Explore Consulting, which we're launching in September. And the real goal behind Explore is to open up the consulting industry to a broader range of talent, and also to enable smaller firms to access that talent more easily. So I'm really excited about that. It's a big challenge, but it also speaks to some of the themes we're going to talk about today. Prior to founding Honeycomb, I was the CFO at Credo, which we sold to Teneo in 2017. And prior to that, I was at Bain and an independent consultant for many years as well. So I've gone from kind of being in the trenches as a client-facing consultant to the operations side, and now helping consulting firms. Anyway, that is enough about me. Let's just check about you and whether you're in the right place. So who is this webinar for? So obviously my focus is on consulting firms. So this is primarily focused on the owners and leaders of consulting firms. The examples will be around consulting firms, but I do think it's going to be of interest to anybody that is looking at how they can motivate and build a more inclusive model for talent in their business. We're going to cover 3 things. So the first is about the pros and cons of traditional models of talent management, the traditional consulting hierarchy. Second, I'm going to introduce the flat firm. There are several clients of mine that are now currently looking at implementing this approach to solve some of the issues that the hierarchy model throws up. I don't want this to be theoretical, so in the final bit of the webinar, I'm going to talk you through a practical guide for how you could put this into place, and that will include real examples that help to bring the whole thing to life for you as well. So hopefully you'll come away from this with an understanding of an alternative model that might exist, and some of the practical steps to put it into place, and to try and decide whether or not it's something that you might want to look at yourselves. So hopefully you're all in the right place. Let me talk about the kind of context to this. So as I've mentioned, the traditional consulting firms are hierarchical. So this is the classic pyramid structure where ultimately the partners rule overall, and typically within that partner group, the ones that bring in the most revenue, and especially from new clients to the firm, are most highly valued, and the whole culture emanates down from that. That model has obviously worked. There are loads of really successful consulting firms that have adopted that model. But the conversations I've had over the last kind of 12 or 18 months in particular with the leaders of smaller firms expresses a lot of frustration with that model. And for many of them, it was actually a driver for them setting up their own firm in the first place, to try and break away from that hard hierarchy. And some of the things that they've identified as kind of problems with that make it suboptimal are you get this narrow definition of the skills that are necessary to be valuable to the firm. I'll talk about that in a bit more detail on the next slide. Because of that narrow definition, you force people down a single career path, and that can cause stress and disengagement from people. It also leads to the classic consulting up or out culture. And I remember when I was applying for consulting firms 20 years ago, there were kind of jokes about how up or out different firms were. But actually, it's still the case today. There are many firms that are up or out. That can be implicit or explicit, but either way, that causes an awful lot of stress. And it's something that we were dealing with when I was at Credo, but we didn't really solve as well as I would have liked. And as a result of that, we lost people who could ultimately contribute to achieving the ambition of the firm. And I think that is the case in many firms. They don't have a clear understanding of the broad enough range of skills that are actually necessary to achieve their strategy because they have this single-minded focus. And in today's world, and coronavirus has accelerated this trend, but it was a trend anyway, people are more and more concerned about where firms can take them, where the company that's employing them can take them and the skills that they can develop. And they're less up for being funneled through the traditional hierarchy that other people have been funneled through. So this model is just not working for large numbers of people that are joining the workforce or have joined the workforce in the last few years. So let's just talk about that traditional hierarchy for a minute, just to bring that into context. So if you've worked anywhere near a consulting firm, you'll probably recognize this. There may be more layers, there may be fewer layers in your firms, but the classic is to have an analyst who's the most junior, a consultant level, a manager level who's kind of coordinating the whole thing, and then you get up to senior manager, director, principal. It often gets quite fuzzy around that level. I'll talk about that more in a second. And then at the top, you have partners and managing directors. As I say, you may have different layers within there, but typically there's a pretty strict hierarchy, and there are pretty strict criteria for moving up that hierarchy. So to get from the analyst to the consultant, you've got to prove your analytical skills. You've got to do the kind of base case cracking analytical work, often Excel heavy. To get from consultant up to manager, you've got to be able to engage clients and solve complex problems. Completely different skill set in many ways from the analyst skill set. You can't get to manager in these firms unless you can do both of those things. To get from manager and on up, you need to prove that you can establish long-term client relationships. And this is where revenue expectations start to come in, and you have to prove that you can roll a case into multiple phases of work. And then ultimately, to get up to partner level, typically to be respected as a partner, you need to be able to sell to new clients to the firm. And also you need to be able to be a leader within the firm. And there's no place in most firms for somebody who is a pure technical guru. Let me talk a little bit about that senior manager, director, principal level, because what I've seen in a lot of firms is that's where issues really start to come out, because a big sticking point in this is the overarching importance that is placed on sales skills. Don't get me wrong, sales skills are critical. If you can't sell, you don't have a consulting firm. But there are different types of sales skills, and often people are less comfortable in certain areas. And you get people get to that senior manager level who don't want to or are unable to develop those sales skills. And they often get kind of shunted sideways. They get given a different role title. They're sort of publicly labeled as, you don't really fit with what we think is important here, so we're just going to stick you here in a holding position, which is really demotivating for those individuals, rather than recognizing the extraordinary capability they've got to deliver for you. People get stuck at other levels as well. So people can get stuck at the analyst level. The classic case of a person who is, everybody says, oh, they'll be great with clients, or they'll be a great consultant if they can just crack this detailed level of analysis. And actually, often you end up losing those people. They are the victims to the up or out policy, rather than finding a way for them to be really valuable to your firm that doesn't require them to be an Excel guru. So this model has worked. It works for rapid skill development in the right, for the right individuals with a right specific set of skills. But it leads to disengagement and stress and anxiety for people that are struggling with those skills, but might have a broader range of skills that actually are valuable to the firm, but the firm just hasn't recognized them yet. And the other challenge with this is you often get partners who are living a certain life that they have chosen to live that is not inspirational to other people in the firm. So one of the firms I've worked with does a regular survey of people, and one of the questions they ask is, how appealing is the partnership for you? And it's consistently one of the most negatively answered questions. The people in the firm don't want to be the partners. And that is a massive problem for a firm that wants to continue to develop, that their partner proposition and the way that their partners are living and operating is not appealing to the rest of their firms. And for me personally, that is one of the reasons that I left Bain. I looked around at the partner group and I said, well, I'm on track to make partner, but I look at the partners and I don't actually want to live the life that any of them are living. And that is an increasing problem with the shift in the workforce. And one of the big reasons why people criticize millennials in a broad sweeping gesture is people that are coming into the workforce now don't necessarily want to live the life that other people lived as they were going through the firm. So what's the alternative? How would it feel to be working in a flat firm instead? So if you get this right, everyone in the firm feels valued for their contribution, whether that's to cracking the client case or building the firm or internal projects. They have a contribution to make, which is why they're working there, and they feel genuinely valued for that contribution. Individuals have flexibility to develop. So you're able to set up a system that matches the activities that most motivate an individual with the things that are important to the firm. And I'm going to talk through in the final part of this about how you can actually do that. That's a critical piece, because intrinsic motivation for individuals is so important. And if you're forcing people to do things that don't motivate them, don't engage them, don't excite them, they're not going to stay in your firm for very long. In that context, you can celebrate diversity. You can create a more inclusive culture because you've reduced this pressure to fit into a certain box within the firm. And ultimately, people are therefore more engaged. They feel valued. They feel understood as people about what motivates them and what they care about, not just what the firm cares about. And that engagement drives increased productivity, increased retention, and ultimately accelerated profit growth for your firm. So that's the goal. If we can put all these things in place, if we can retain all the good things about the traditional hierarchy, but address the things that cause stress, disengagement, and anxiety, you ultimately will get better productivity, better retention, and accelerated profit growth. And particularly in a world where we are all going to be working remotely, more than we were to different extents. Some firms will go almost completely remote. Some firms will go kind of 30, 50% remote. It's still going to be a lot more than it was. That productivity engagement is critical if you're going to retain people. Their employment options, once the economy recovers a bit, will increase. So what do you actually need to believe in order to make this attractive for you? What are the foundations of having a flat firm? So first of all, you need to believe that your firm needs a range of skills, a wider range of skills than just pure client delivery and sales skills. If you don't believe that, or the leaders of your firm don't believe that, then this model is probably not going to work for you. You need to believe that people can bring value in different ways. So it's not just the case that the value comes from that traditional hierarchy. If you don't believe that that people have different ways that they can add value to your clients, this model is not going to work for you. You need to believe that people are most productive when they are self-motivated, when what you're asking them to do aligns with what intrinsically motivates them. You need to believe that you want to retain talented people. Hopefully that one is relatively easy to believe for most people. And the final point is really important. You need to commit to a culture change and the work required to put that culture change in place. And that requires a redefinition of your expectations of individuals. What are you asking them to be good at? And what are you valuing as part of that? That requires a lot of work and a lot of commitment from the top of the firm. So this is not something that you can implement bottom up. You can't do this from an HR function pushing and pushing. You need proper commitment from the senior leadership of the firm, because they must value the different ways that people could bring value to the firm. That requires a lot of work to clarify expectations, to really embed those expectations, and to embed the behavior change around that. So this isn't something to be entered into lightly. This is why it's easier for smaller firms to implement this, particularly when the mandate is coming from the top of the firm. So let's talk about what that would actually feel like in practice in a firm. And obviously the core of a consulting firm is the case team. So how would this feel for a flat firm case team? There are many different ways you can assemble a case team, but fundamentally you're bringing together a group of people who need to do certain things to solve the problem for the clients and deliver value for them. So here's an example of some things that they might need to do. You obviously, in the bottom left, need project management skills. Someone's got to coordinate the whole thing, whether that's a 2-week piece of customer insight work for a commercial due diligence program or a 3-year transformation program. You need a level of project management capability. You need some kind of ability to create output that is compelling to the client and interesting and compels them to make change. In the bottom right, you often need some level of research, you need some technical analysis, and you need somebody that's able to bring external context to the team, whether that's the industry, the company in particular, the broader market context, the economic context, whatever it is, there'll be external views that need to be brought in and taken account of. So traditionally, those roles would be very tightly tied to seniority within the firm. So the external context would often be brought by the partner who has done 10 other due diligences in this area, for example. In a flat firm, you can kind of break the seniority and skill link because you can line this up with the individuals who are most passionate about these areas. So you might still have a generalist analyst who is doing the research, doing the technical analysis, but they could be supported by a technical expert, somebody who isn't necessarily senior, but has deep knowledge in a particular tool that is helpful for that case context, that they have personally invested time in because they're interested and motivated to develop their skills in that area. And the key with this is to bring those people in to that case team to bring their skills to bear and value them for that, rather than trying to push them down a different route to develop other skills. On the project management side, like traditionally the manager has to do the project management. When I was a manager at Bain, I was a shitty project manager because it's just not something that is of interest to me. I'm not intrinsically motivated by putting a plan together and following it systematically. I can't do it. So it was much more valuable to me to have somebody in my team at whatever level they are who is naturally good at that and wants to do it and wants to take that charge. Equally, if somebody is naturally good at that and I'm being forced to do it, it's deeply stressful for them that I'm doing a crap job at it. So it doesn't have to be the consultant or the manager that does the project management, but if you can find the person that is best suited to do that and has the capacity to do it, they will be motivated by that role and the importance of that role, and they'll do a better job than someone like me would do doing it. They might also find, if you've got a consultant doing that role, you might find that they are also producing some output, but you also have a slide expert who's bringing in the capability and the knowledge and the expertise of exactly how to present things that are compelling. And then finally, you might have a sector expert of some kind bringing in external context. Again, this doesn't have to be a partner. This could be somebody who just has a deep personal interest in that area, is well read around it, and has decided to develop expertise there that is brought into the case team. And crucially, all of these people have an important role to play in convincing the client to change whatever it is you think that they should change, which is the crux of delivering value from a consulting perspective. This means there is no kind of partner gateway to the client. The whole team has access to them, and this requires trust that clients will value the interactions with the people in your team. If the people in your team are focused on the things that they're passionate about, then that passion will come across to the clients and clients will value them. Clients understand that you have junior people in your team. They get it. They don't need to be hidden away from the junior people in your team. So that's how it can feel in a flat firm case team. I'm now going to go through the steps that you might take in order to put this into practice. So there are 5 steps that we use in this. So first of that is to go right back to the start and get crystal clear on the capabilities that your firm needs to be successful. What is the ambition that you're trying to achieve? How does that translate into a commercial strategy for the clients you're going to focus on and the value you're going to deliver to them, your value propositions around that? If you get crystal clear on that, you can then identify the capabilities that are most important for delivering that. And that takes you away from that strict hierarchy into a broader range of things that are important. Step 2 is to identify the skills in great detail in each of those areas so that people understand how they go from a base level of skill right up to being a master in that skill area, so they can add the most possible value to the firm and allow them to align those skills to their interests. That's what happens in step 3. So when you take step 3 and you start to define career paths and roles, they're combinations of these skills and different skill levels that are needed in the firm, but individuals can align to the areas that are most interesting to them. Step 4, once you put all of that in place, is you have to go through a process of updating your reviews, your feedback processes, your coaching processes, so that everybody in the firm understands that you're now focusing on these skill areas. You're enabling people to develop their personal development plans in line with the career path that you and they have mutually agreed is the right one for them to go down. And finally, step 5, and this is critical to really take the skills up to the level they need to be at, you need a systematic firm-wide skill development program that goes beyond just formal training, but actually puts in place the right systems, processes, and encourages the right behaviors to embed the skills that you need. So those are the 5 steps. I'm just going to go through an example of each of those just to bring it to life for all of you as well. And once we get through that, then we'll move on to Q&A, and James and I can discuss questions. So step 1 is about identifying the capabilities that matter to your business. As I said, this starts from your ambition through your commercial strategy into your capabilities. And the capabilities that matter most for success of your strategy are the ones that underpin your differentiation in the eyes of your clients. So it gives them a reason to engage you in the first place. And ones that underpin your value delivery to clients, gives them a reason. It enables you to keep your promises to them and deliver value. Typically, that will result in a set of capabilities that you identify as these are the things we need to be brilliant at within the business. I recommend that as a step to launch off a whole bunch of different things around operations planning and outsourcing decisions, but it's also critical for this skill development process. Often that will be grouped into 4 different areas. So you might have a set of skills around business development. This is just an illustrative example. This is highly bespoke to your personal situation. So I recommend you do that thinking separately for your context for your business. But they will typically fall into 4 or 5 different areas. So business development might be the skill at building firm advocacy very actively and measuring it, building long-term client relationships that roll and bringing in new clients to the business. You might have a set of things around delivering client value. So are you effective at project management in a way that enables you to deliver value? Do you do technical analysis, writing, and communications? This will depend a lot on the type of consulting that you do. I have a set of things around client and team interactions. So leadership skills, personal attitude, often the values of a firm might be embedded in that dimension, or the ability to form strong client relationships. And finally, business operations, which is an area that often gets overlooked, but many business processes can be absolutely critical to your ability to meet client needs. So for example, if one of the typical needs of your clients is the ability to rapidly mobilize a case team at short notice, your resourcing processes and systems that you set up are absolutely critical to both your differentiation and your value delivery. So that should be a skill that you are developing within your firm, a capability within your firm. Recruitment often is a key area of differentiation, particularly to make sure that you're getting the exact precise skills that are going to be valuable to your clients. And reporting might well be a core differentiating process so that you're able to demonstrate the value to your clients or to make internal decisions that are critical. So this won't be the right set of stuff for your firm, but hopefully that gives you a flavor of how you might identify the right capabilities for your firm to achieve your ambition. And then in each of those areas, you can go through and define, right, what's our base level? What is the minimum we can expect for people in our firm in each of these areas, which could be almost nothing, or it could be quite a high bar. From that base level, you build up good, excellent to master level. What is the optimum level that we want people to be operating at? And typically you would need somebody, at least one person in the firm, to be at a master level in all of these areas for you to be fully optimized in terms of achieving your strategy. In order to define those things, you need to go through quite a detailed exercise. So for example, one of the ways we typically do this is we look at base, good, excellent master levels and across those different areas. And we say, what are the specific behaviors that we need from somebody to say that they're operating at that level? And we detail that out in a table like this. Is just a little snapshot of an example, but that gives people a reference guide so that they can understand where they're currently at, what are their own strengths and gaps in the areas that they're trying to develop, and what does that look like for them to be operating at the next level. So they can be really clear about the things that they need to be able to do and do consistently. Typically, to develop something like this, I would start from defining what the master level looks like, what's the excellent level and the base level, and then fill in progressions in between. And those progressions might be doing things with increasing levels of independence. So you might go from able to do something with significant support to able to do something with independently. It might be going from that they're able to do something to the fact that you actually trust them to do it, to the fact that you seek them out to do it, for example. You may need more detail within these, but this is a great place to start. And it's really important that these are focused on behaviors and inputs that people can control, not outputs. So a master level shouldn't be generates £1 million a year of revenue. The master level should be about the behaviors that you believe as a firm will lead to the successful outcome that you want. So once you've got the set of capabilities that you need and the detailed skill specifications behind them, you can start to turn that into a set of career paths and specific roles for people. So you can, first of all, think about what your broad career paths are that are valuable to you as a firm. And that often will start with a generalist pool. And I don't think there's any issue with people being generalists at the junior level. The question is at what point do you allow people to specialize? And that specialism needs to be more than just, you can focus on a specific sector or a specific service area, but you still need to be good at all the full-rounded skills that we need. What I'm talking about in the flat firm model is enabling people to specialize in skill areas like sales, delivery, technical analysis, or operations at a point in their career where it makes sense for them to do that. And they can do that by developing skills in those different capabilities from good to excellent to master in line with a certain career path. And when you're defining the career path, what you're really doing is saying to get to this level in the technical career path, we expect capabilities 1, 2, and 3 to be at an excellent level, and overall you to have no fewer than 2 things that they're still at base, for example. So let's look at how that might look for individual roles. So if you take a technical lead, you could map them onto your capability matrix and say, well, the technical lead needs to be an absolute master at solving complex data problems. We also have a non-negotiable that they have to be a master at their personal attitude for that level of seniority. However, for something like resourcing or new client conversion, they don't need to have anything above base. That's not what we're asking them to do. We need to bring in a sales lead. They need to be a master at new client conversion. That's the thing they're there for. They probably also need to be a master at building firm advocacy. They don't need to have any skill in solving complex data problems necessarily, if they can run a process that brings in the necessary expertise from elsewhere in the firm at the necessary point in time. So ultimately, you end up with a set of people that have mastery in all of those areas. As your firm grows and as your capability expands, most small firms are not going to be there from day one. People with mastery in all of those areas that gives the firm a set of capabilities, aligns those individuals with the things that are most interesting to them and motivating for them, and therefore they're going to be better at and more productive. You don't need to have all of those skills held in one individual. So you've gone through defining your capabilities, figuring out the detailed skill specifications behind them. You've figured out what your career paths and roles look like. So that's kind of the designing of the model. If you just tell people this is how we're going to do things, it's not going to get very far. You also need to look at your review processes. So there's a lot of detail that would sit behind this. I'm just going to talk about one example of a kind of project review process and how that would work. Typically, you'd have multiple project review processes that roll up into a consensus type review every 6 months or 12 months that then drives promotion decisions, etc. So in a project review process, typically at the end of a project or minimum every 8 weeks, say, you would have a self-assessment process and feedback from the project team against the expectations of somebody based on their current skill level. So as a firm, we understand that your skill level is here on all of these different dimensions, and that's where we expect you to operate for your current role. So we're going to give you feedback as to whether you're currently at that level, and you're going to self-assess as well. You typically score that on a 1 to 5 scale, with 3 being at expectations. And as people start to outperform their expectations and develop in the areas that they've identified as they want to develop, you start to see them picking up 4s and 5s, which indicate outperformance and that they're getting ready to be at the next level. They might fall back in some areas with 1s and 2s, and that's where you start thinking about personal interventions to help them develop their skills in those areas. Once you've assessed where they're at currently and you've got alignment with them on that, then you talk about, okay, what does this mean going forwards? What are your personal preferences? What are the firm's priorities? Let's figure out which of these career paths is going to work best for all of us, and try and identify a small number of development priorities for the next phase of development. 2 or 3 priorities, embed those into the personal development plans and make sure that they are perfectly aligned with that agreed career path. Once you've gone through that process for everybody, you'll have a good idea of where people are trying to develop in the firm. And the final point I want to make is around how you can enable skill development. So what are the support systems that you need to have in place? You want people to progress in certain areas from base, good, excellent, up to master levels of skills in those areas. In order to do that, you need to put in place a set of organizational enablers. So if you have nothing in place, call it raw, there's no formal support for individuals to develop skills. You're typically expecting them just to learn on the job and figure it out as they go. You might say, oh God, well, that's not going to work. Actually, for small firms as they're growing, that's often the way that people have to operate, because there's no real training in place. You haven't put the systems in place. You're expecting them to just develop their skills as they go. And there's a limit to how much somebody is going to develop mastery, or at least how fast they're going to develop mastery if you do that. Then the next level up would be to put some kind of formal training and structured coaching processes in place so that you're systematically moving people through, which is a good and necessary step. Typically, it doesn't go far enough. So you need this enhanced level where you've really thought about the systems, processes, and behaviors that enable an individual to reach their full potential in that skill area. That takes somebody, say they're good when you've got none of this stuff in place, and they respond really well to you putting all of that stuff in place and they become a master. That's what you're trying to achieve. It's an important part of this whole process that in order for individuals to take personal responsibility, that the firm has gone through the necessary steps to put all these things in place to support them. If you've done all of that and their skills still haven't developed, then chances are they are not going to make it up down that career path that you need. That doesn't mean that they have to be pushed out of the firm, but it means that you need to think about the value to the firm and where they can sit, and make sure that they are in a position that is valued going forwards. So I've covered quite a lot of detail there. What have we gone through? I'll just recap and then we can move on to Q&A. So I can see some questions coming through already in the Q&A. Great to kind of get more in, and then James and I will do our best to answer them. So what have we covered? So firstly, talked about the hierarchy model of consulting firms and how that can be suboptimal for inclusion and engagement. We talked about the flat firm approach, which is a model that several firms are starting to put into place and helps engage individuals and value their skills more highly. And then I went through the practical steps for how you might put this into place to bring it to life. It's difficult to put this in place effectively without doing all of those things. So, and it's a reasonable amount of work to put it all in place. So have a really good think about, is this a road that we want to go down? And have we got the proper commitment and buy-in from the top before we want to put something like this in place? And with that, I'll pause there and we can move on to Q&A.
Great. Thank you very, very much indeed, Deri. Excellent presentation, highly relevant, and I think no doubt something of an area to watch. I think before we, first of all, please, if you have any questions, just drop them into the Q&A box or the chat box below, and I'll do my best to cover everyone off in the next 20 minutes or so. But I might abuse my position as chairperson to just ask a couple of quick questions first. The first one for me is around, so role model companies that you have seen who really embraced the flat firm idea before. I've certainly seen, the big top firms really focusing on having much more speciality now. So whether it's McKinsey Digital or Deloitte embracing more sort of the design delivery of their work, particularly in Australia. And we've also seen the growth of these hyper specialist niche, very small boutique consultancies delivering very, very high quality work. Are there any sort of pin-up consulting firms out there around the world that has sort of given you some sort of excitement about where a flat consulting firm could go?
I think you're right that the bigger firms are kind of moving in this direction. I think one of the challenges is that they have such entrenched culture around this hierarchy and around the kind of partner role in particular, that it's very difficult for them to, yes, they can bring in those different skills from different parts of the business, but those parts of the business are often managed very separately, even branded differently. Yeah. So I think it's actually very difficult for a big firm to fundamentally shift its model like this because of the need for behavior change and cultural change right from the top of the firm across such a huge group of partners. So I don't have a global example of a firm that's done this really well. One of the small firms, kind of 50-person firm in London that's doing a great job with this is Red Kite. And they have, from the start, designed to put this in place. So they're a great benchmark, I think. Great.
Have to have it. Right. Diving into some questions. So the first one is about rate cards. So this is Simon. Clients typically pay for resource on a tiered basis with a rate card aligned to a traditional hierarchical approach. Can it be more difficult to demonstrate seniority or grade to clients under a flat structure when justifying day rates to them?
Firstly, I would separate out the internal flat structure and the internal way that things are valued with how you express things externally. So I don't think you necessarily have to say, well, all of our firm are the same. Actually, a lot of firms will say that, and they'll try and break away from that rate card and to fix project fees and value and a flat day rate. I'm not really a fan of talking about a flat day rate either, because it often erodes your project margins. If you can get to fixed fee engagements, then that's perfect. I totally appreciate, particularly in the public sector, that's very difficult. So I think often you will have an external level and an internal grade. And the really key thing is the cultural acceptance of everybody's value. Just because somebody is a technical lead doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get paid the same as the sales lead, but they need to be valued internally within the culture for what they bring in the same way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, particularly in our world at Fresh Minds, what we find, particularly at the moment or over the last couple of years, has been people hiring very, very senior experts, but just for very short bursts of time on projects. So the project might last 3 months, and we might put a very experienced world expert onto it for sort of six afternoons, and that might be enough of that expertise for the project, given the duration of 3 months. So from internal day rates to paying your staff, so remuneration structures, this is from Ian. Hi Ian, how are you? Remuneration structures in a hierarchical structure are pretty well understood. How do you reward people in a flat structure? Does this get linked to competency mastery or case outcomes?
So I would, I'd link to both depending on the seniority. So competency mastery, absolutely. So this model doesn't get away with the concept of expertise and mastery, and those people will have more value and should be paid more. What it gets away from is not valuing other skills that actually are important to your business, but you've kind of chosen to ignore that. As you get more senior in the firm and the skills that you're master in are more linked to case outcomes, then it's appropriate to link bonus, etc. to that. In general, I'm a bigger fan of having bonus pools linked to overall firm profitability and having everybody share in that pot. And maybe having a few bits where you're rewarding behaviors that you want to see in particular as well. But yeah, it's you link it to the role, and the role is linked to competency mastery.
Yeah. And then a question from Tom. Is there a risk of the subconscious or indeed conscious bias in bucketing someone too early in a particular skill set? So we see them in their early career being brilliant at analysis or understanding telecoms industry. We bucket them very quickly. Is that something that you think might happen to people?
So firstly, I think there is always a risk of unconscious and conscious bias in everything we do. So it's a great question from that point of view. I think so the key here is that this is a two-way conversation. So this isn't about, we've identified that you're good at this, so we're going to make you focus on this. It's about what is intrinsically motivating and interesting to that individual. Because if somebody happens to be good at something and you say, right, you've got to do more of this because you're good at it. And that is a classic trap that we have where you get somebody who is particularly good at a certain type of analysis. So everybody always wants them on their project team to do that bit of analysis. That person might say, I'm fed up of doing this. I don't want to do it. It doesn't excite me. That's a real mistake for them and they're going to leave ultimately. If that person is intrinsically motivated and excited by doing that bit of work, then they're going to be up for it and they're going to want to do it. So I think the key is just to avoid bucketing somebody against their will, as it were. And it being a two-way conversation where they say, this is the area that I'd really like to focus on if we can make that fit with the firm's ambitions. If that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. And then a question from Kirsty. This is for someone leaving sort of the broader industry, let's say commercial world. If someone joins a consultancy from an alternative background, i.e. not entry level, how would you advise the team considers to maximize their productivity and engagement? So I don't know if we experienced at Credo or Bain in that area, but what's your thoughts about bringing someone from Rolls-Royce into Bain or whatever else?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and this model actually solves that problem pretty well, because you can say, right, why are we bringing this person in? Because we've identified the capabilities that we need in the business and the levels that we need them at. We've got a gap somewhere, whether that's an ongoing gap or a short-term gap. So James, as you said, if you've got a short-term gap, you can bring in an external expert to plug that skill gap for a project. If you've got an ongoing gap and you want to bring in somebody to fill that gap, then immediately you're bringing them in a way that is aligned with their skills and interest and intrinsic motivation. So that already gets you a couple of rungs up the ladder in terms of productivity and engagement. They will likely, almost always, will have gaps in terms of some of the other areas that might be weaker than you would ideally like. So it's focusing on those areas to bring them up to scratch so that they can really bring in deliver the skill that you brought them in for. The mistake I often see is when people pigeonhole outsiders into very specific ways of doing things. So you might say, oh, they're not very good at, they don't design slides in the way that we would design slides. And you dismiss the way that they do it because it's not how you've always done it. And I think that's a real trap to try and avoid falling into, to try and say, why do they do it like that? Is there value in doing that? Or am I just saying, well, I don't like the way that slide's designed, so I'm going to tell you that you're bad at that skill. So I think the key thing when you're bringing in people from an alternative background is to say, what is the skill that they're great at? This is why we've brought them in. They're going to be brilliant at this. We all just need to support them to develop their skills in other areas so that they can be brilliant at that.
Yes, and that actually leads nicely to Sarah's question, which is all about, it's all very well hiring people on this sort of, what we call professionals, a sort of Legofication of a team where you put different skills in for different requirements that the client might need. But that hyper specialization to then also developing a wider skill set. So how do you balance allowing people to focus on skills and areas that motivate them with the benefits of then stretching people outside of that comfort zone to develop a wider range of skills in the model, which ultimately will make them better business people in the future and build their profile and CV going forward?
Yeah, so again, I think that that comes back to an open, honest, two-way conversation with that individual. So in areas that motivate them, you won't have to push them because they'll naturally be wanting to stretch themselves because they're motivated in that area. The honest conversation comes when you say, okay, if you just focus on that, you're going to miss out on this opportunity to develop these other skills, which may be valuable to you down the line. So whether that's, so I talked about my own kind of incompetence as a like major consulting project manager and work planning. That skill nonetheless has stayed with me as something that I can use to close that gap a little bit. So it was an important base level for me to develop, but it wasn't something that I should have been trying to develop to a mastery level, because I'm much better at other things around the consulting skill set. So you can encourage people to stretch themselves in other areas and develop for their own benefit. It's when you force people to not work on things that motivate them because you've decided that a narrow range of skills is important to you that you start to cause problems.
Great, you're very modest. I can't believe for a moment you're not a fabulous project manager. You're certainly the way you project manage us through this exercise would ensure that you're very good at managing large-scale projects. And that's my next question, which is around how you manage people. So Hazib and Mark from the consultancy network have asked similar questions. So traditionally, your managers and senior managers would have had people management responsibility. How would you recommend this changes in a flat structure? And another example of this is, how do you then, which is Mark's question, how do you bring in, you know, when you've got a real tech expert, who's going to manage that tech expert? If, you know, if the manager is just a good general consultant and not maybe a tech expert themselves, how are they going to offer a kind of good runway or track of development for that tech expert?
Sure. So I think when you think about management of people in a line management in a consulting firm, there's two different sides to it. So there's management of individuals within a case team, and then there's management of individuals as they develop through their career. So just to handle those two separately. So management of individuals within a case team. You will typically have somebody who's playing that project coordination role and is identifying all of the things that need to be done, with the individuals inputting their own expertise on what needs to be done to solve that client problem. And they are coordinating that everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. That comes with a level of trust for the individuals that they will do what they need to do, but that's inherent to this whole model. In terms of the individuals within their career path and within their development, typically they would have a career development manager or coach or a mentor or a personal development manager that's separate to all of this. And most firms in the hierarchy have that kind of role in place anyway. That person is the one that helps that individual identify their development areas, identify the types of projects they should be working on to develop those skills. The individual is responsible for bringing that into the case team environment and saying, this is what I need to develop, this is what I'm working on, and I ask all of you in my team to support me in working on that by giving me feedback where it's not working in the way that it should be. In the case where you've got a technical expert who has skills and knowledge that are beyond somebody else in the firm, in that case team, for example, then you've broadly got two options for their development. Either somebody else in the firm is able to coach them on that project team if the internal team are not able to give them feedback that's helpful to them, or you have to start thinking about bringing in external coaches as well to guide them in their development.
Another thing to think about, Deri, I don't know what your thoughts are, is I suppose one trend we've seen, I mean, I've been in the headhunting and consulting world for most of my career, really, 17, 18 years. But I suppose what I have noticed is a lot of high performers are quite happy to retrain into something completely different. So they might have joined, you know, a consulting firm with one particular spike in an industry or a skill set. And yeah, as the economy changes and we move towards, you know, digital transformation or remote workforce design, people seem to change their skill sets accordingly. Do you think that's something that we'll see more of, i.e. you become an expert in something for 5 years and then you kind of pivot on to something else?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that trend, that I've probably followed it a bit myself as well. I think there's a balance for individuals to strike on that, because there is a benefit and a value to developing deep expertise in a certain area. And if you do 5 years in one thing and then 5 years in another and 5 years in another, you may get less of that value. The plus side is, by combining insights from all of those different areas, you can come up with something that is also super valuable. So it's kind of an individual decision, I think. But under this model, you would enable people to start to shift their priorities. What it might mean is they're not kind of progressing up towards master as much in those areas, because they sort of start and they go off and develop in a different area.
Yeah.
And individuals just need to be aware and conscious of that trade-off that they're making. But equally, there's a risk that you spend years developing deep knowledge and skill in a something that becomes obsolete because the world changes. So that flexibility, it's a personal choice. I personally like the flexibility and the ability to mesh different backgrounds and different areas of knowledge into something that's unique. But for some people, that deep expertise gives them a real kind of grounding and solidity and confidence.
Yeah, I mean, certainly for me, I look at people, you know, obviously we get thousands of CVs every year and profiles, and I think you need a kind of base skill set or base trade, whatever that is. But I do think you need a kind of point of difference as well, be that an industry or a sector knowledge or just a sort of experience that does set you apart from everybody else. I think it just makes you more marketable, probably internally and externally in the job market. And on the job market, I suppose going to the recruitment challenge of a flat firm versus, you know, I suppose the advantage of the kind of 1960s, you know, McKinsey, Bain, BCG model of kind of hiring bright graduates, pushing them out to do MBAs and growing them up through the pyramid that you discussed on your second or third slide. I suppose now with your sort of hypothesis around a flat firm, how do you structure sort of entry level recruitment, or is it you just recruit at different levels? I suppose you need to be able to anticipate future demand of work from very specialist skill sets, and that's before they've been trained up as analysts or associates. What's your sort of thinking around how one might recruit at scale for these?
Yeah. So I think, so ideally you have a good understanding of the capabilities that you need as a firm to do this, and that isn't static. That should be, to the extent possible, projected into the future in line with your strategy. I would still recommend that people focus their hiring on, particularly over the long term, consistently on the junior end, so that they're bringing in talented generalists, but with a view to identifying the capabilities and the motivations that will enable them to fit into the areas that are important to the firm over time. I don't see that doesn't change that much under this model versus the older model. It just means that you might identify somebody who is more, you won't single-mindedly focus on analytical capability or problem-solving capability as much as you would otherwise. So it enables you to broaden the pool of people that are interesting to you, because you might say, well, actually, if this person is just a superstar at convincing people, and we can train them up to understand the underlying analysis well enough without actually having to do it themselves, then they still can have value to us. So you're still focusing the majority of your hiring on that graduate pool and training them up, because however you arrange it, hiring at a senior level is difficult, and a lot of firms that try and do it don't get it right.
Yes, no, I can attest to that. Yeah. And so last question, we'd be failing on the Trades Descriptions Act if I didn't ask you the profitability question. And it may just be a few top tips, really. We've only got a few minutes left, but what is it, I suppose, you've looked at lots of consulting firms. Where is the big leak in profit, do you think? And what can firms focus on, particularly now looking out in the next 6 months with a lot of uncertainty, you know, heading our way? What are the sorts of key things when you spend 5 minutes with a senior partner of a consulting firm that you like to ask about?
So I think there's an awful lot of answers to that question, but in the context of this, I think the key profit leak that I see time and again is the time taken to address underperformers who are not meeting whatever kind of single track criteria have been defined, and that time is disproportionately focused on addressing gaps in those individuals and skills that they're not interested in developing, rather than focusing that time on the higher on others that are either just inherently a better fit for your business, or even with that individual on the things that they're really strong at. So it sucks up a huge amount of time when you start to put somebody through a disciplinary process and you have all of these meetings, all of their stress, their productivity drops through the floor. Their peers understand that they're going through a stressful process, and that puts them on edge. They're all feeling under pressure to drive up this hierarchy. If you can start to value everybody's capabilities for what they really bring to the business, and focus less on the gaps, which are often to an extent, I mean, I use the word arbitrary, it's not the right word, but to an extent they're less important than people think they are. That is just a massive sink of time and energy and productivity drain, and that ultimately hits profitability. On top of that, those people then leave, and you've got all the cost of replacing them, all the cost of retraining up somebody else, etc., etc. So the profitability impact of this can be pretty huge.
Yeah. Great. We're nearly at a full hour, and I think the notion of hiring well and making sure you retain great talent is a fitting end to any Fresh Minds webinar. So I think just a couple of thank yous from me as we end. First of all, a very big thank you to all of our attendees near and far who joined this talk. Lovely to have you, and thank you for all your questions. And then a very, very big virtual thank you to Deri, giving up your valuable time to come and talk to Fresh Minds this afternoon. Totally fascinating stuff. I think we're going to see a lot of accelerating change in the way that consulting firms are structured, the way that they recruit, the way they resource projects on both a full-time and a flexible way forward. And hopefully that Honeycomb and Fresh Minds can benefit from that enhanced demand for a bit of flexibility and innovation. So thank you all. Have a lovely sunny afternoon if you're in the UK, and see you at our next webinar, which will be in 2 or 3 weeks' time. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.